Today, we're going to be asking ourselves how the Orlando Magic fell apart in only a couple of years. This is not a story of success or redemption. This is a story of failure, and it's only one of many. The Orlando Magic played their first NBA season in 1989. Of course, since they were building through an expansion draft, there weren't many highlights. One of them was Scott Skiles, a point guard selected through this draft. And, fun fact, even though he wasn't that good, he does hold the record for most assists in an NBA game. Of course, other than Scott, there weren't many bright spots on Orlando, but the Magic would do a good job of collecting talent through the draft. In the 1989 draft and the 1990 draft, the Magic would do a great job of getting solid pieces so they could build in the future. These two players, Nick Anderson and Dennis Scott, will help a lot when the Magic start competing. In the 1991 draft, they drafted Brian Williams. Certainly an underwhelming prospect. And for the first 3 years, Orlando did a good job drafting. But next year, something much bigger is going to come Orlando's way. As shown earlier, in the 1991 NBA season, Orlando collected 21 wins. So they had the number one pick in 1992. And luckily, there's a generational talent waiting for them. Center Shaquille O'Neal was waiting for them with the number one pick. Orlando picked him, and he would later become one of the greatest centers in NBA history. They saw his monster numbers in LSU and thought it would translate to the NBA. With Shaquille O'Neal at the helm, Orlando made their first real progress in years. With a 41-41 record, they would barely scrape into the draft lottery, and they hoped that through this lottery they would be able to get a high pick and take advantage of that. With the worst odds of getting the number one pick, Orlando somehow struck gold and got it anyway. Now Orlando had all the tools at their disposal thanks to the draft lottery to pick whoever they wanted. With the new tool at their disposal, Orlando had two real options for the number one pick. One of them, Sean Bradley out of BYU, and the other, Chris Webber out of Michigan. On draft night, with the number one pick, Orlando selected Chris Webber. But this was short-lived. They decided that Chris Webber wasn't worth the value of the number one pick, so they decided to trade him. In a blockbuster deal, the Orlando Magic traded number one pick Chris Webber to the Golden State Warriors for the third pick, who is Penny Hardaway, and 3 first-round picks. This is what we call a good trade for Orlando. The centerpiece of this deal was Penny Hardaway. Orlando thought he had star potential, and it turns out they're going to be right. In the 1993-1994 NBA season, the Magic finally made the playoffs with a record of 50-32. This is because of their star core, now built from point guard Penny Hardaway and center Shaquille O'Neal. In the playoffs, they are going to play the Indiana Pacers. In the playoffs, Reggie Miller and the Pacers beat the Orlando Magic in only 3 games. Orlando was inexperienced, and teams were just figuring out how to guard Shaq. The Pacers did a lot of this. What they did was when Shaq was in the paint, they'd foul him, send him to the free throw line, where Shaq would probably miss his shots. This is what we know today as the Hack-a-Shaq, and the Pacers certainly used it in this 3-game victory. Next year, Orlando came back with vengeance. With newly acquired Horace Grant, they steamrolled through the Eastern Conference with a finishing record of 57 wins and 25 losses. This season, Penny Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal proved that they were the best duo in the NBA. Both putting up good numbers and leading the Magic to a high seed, they were ready to finally compete in the playoffs. The Magic would then fight their way through the playoffs, beating Charlotte Hornets in the first round 3-1, then going to beat the Chicago Bulls, which pretty much had Michael Jordan in the Eastern Conference Finals 2-4. Their next matchup would be the Houston Rockets in the NBA Finals. The Magic hoped to grab momentum in Game 1, and near the end of the game, they had a 3-point lead. So, in a last-ditch effort, the Houston Rockets sent Nick Anderson to the line. All Nick Anderson had to do was make one of these free throws, and the Magic win Game 1 and are on track to win the rest of the series. But Nick Anderson not only misses one, he misses both. But this is okay, because he grabs his own rebound. He has 2 more free throws after Houston fouls him again. All he has to do is make one of these. And he misses both again. The Houston Rockets would grab the rebound, run down the court, and Kenny Smith would hit a 3 that would send the game to overtime and eventually win it for the Rockets. This moment not only derailed the NBA Finals series for the Magic, but it also derailed Nick Anderson's career. And after this, Nick Anderson will never be the same player. In the rest of the series, the Magic would get swept, and that's after losing a lot of confidence in Game 1. Sadly, this is the peak for the Orlando Magic, and the peak of this story. Now, the Magic didn't break down right away, as they had a better record than they did last season. With a 60-22 finish, they were ready to compete in the playoffs, and they made a run. But in the Eastern Conference Finals, they ran into the Chicago Bulls, who had prime Michael Jordan, and they were a 72-win team. So the Magic were no match for them. And the Magic started asking themselves, will they ever be a match for this team? With the series loss fresh on his mind, Shaquille O'Neal entered his free agency, and he had the expectation of getting one of the biggest contracts in NBA history. It was time for the Magic to pay up and get their superstar. Unfortunately, the Magic decided to lowball him, as Shaq was upset because his deal was worth less than Juwan Howard's $105 million 7-year contract. And because the Magic didn't appreciate Shaq while he was there, he decided to walk away. Shaq left Orlando behind to join the LA Lakers. Here, he could thrive on his new $120 million 7-year contract, which is more than Juwan Howard. Now the Magic are left without their superstar and a bad Nick Anderson, but at least they have their star, Penny Hardaway. Or do they? The answer is kind of. Penny Hardaway had to carry the Magic to only a .500 record, and with all of this carrying, he started to get injured, and this would stop his stardom after a couple of years. After struggling with injuries for a couple of seasons, the Magic decided to trade Penny Hardaway away. He was traded to the Phoenix Suns for really not much. So, just like that, the Magic were left without their 2 stars and an average team. The Magic story is one of tragedy, injuries, and not appreciating what they had. You can only imagine what it would look like if they had kept Shaq and been able to compete for the next couple of years. You can only imagine what would have happened if they took stress off Penny. Now, we're only left here to wonder, what about the dynasty that never was?